Welcome, soil conservation and management students, to our session 15 lecture series on applications of GIS and GNSS in agriculture. In session 14 we talked about GIS and GNSS systems and how they work. Specifically, we spent a lot of time talking about how GNSS systems are global navigation satellite systems. The US system, of course, is called GPS, or Global Positioning System, and GPS is often the term we use to describe GNSS systems because it was the first one. Okay, in this lecture series here, we're going to break down the lecture into 5 different video lectures, including this one, where in this video lecture we're going to introduce you to applications of GIS in agriculture, kind of give you an explanation of why we would, or how we use GNSS or GIS in agriculture, and the 4 examples, and there are actually more examples than the 4 that are shown here, but these are the 4 I wanted to focus on because we can tie them back to soil conservation and management in ways that these systems also help reduce soil degradation. The 4 types of applications we're going to focus on are soil sampling, and really what we might be able to call this here, and I'll just correct it here or add it in here, is grid zone and grid soil sampling. The next one here is nutrient management and variable rate technology, and this really looks at ways that we can use a GPS to identify specific areas in the field that may need additional inputs. That may not just be fertilizers, but lime application for correcting soil pHs also falls under this category. And instead of putting one rate or the same amount of lime or fertilizer everywhere in the field, we determine the areas that need more or less, and then apply that rate, or apply the lime or the fertilizer in the amounts needed for the right places in the field, or what we call the site-specific areas of the field. We'll also talk about crop scouting, and what I like to call this is site-specific crop scouting, because what we're really doing is we're using a GPS or a GNSS as we're out in the field identifying pest pressures, disease pressure, insects, irrigation problems, nutrient problems, and we're doing that with a device that also has GNSS, and so we're able to identify the specific areas in the field that have the problems. Okay, this in turn allows us to use things like variable rate technology to apply pesticides specific to the areas that are needed, or apply additional irrigation water to the areas that are needed. The final one we are going to talk about is yield, and it really is going to be yield monitoring and mapping. It's not just monitoring the yield, but it's also mapping that yield. And by doing so, we can then identify areas within the field that may need different management practices, or we can identify areas where we shouldn't be removing crop residue because of potential erosion problems. Okay. Now, why would we worry about using a GNSS system in agriculture? And really comes down to this term spatial variability. The idea here is that as we move through the field, it changes. It's not the same everywhere. Okay, things change from place to place. This is a picture of a soil map, and these circles or lines are showing us the different soils that are found within this mapped area, which is probably about 100 hectares. There are about 25 different soils that have been identified in that 1 hectare area. Notice there's also different areas where there's trees or forest, areas that are being farmed, areas that are water. Okay, and then if we look at these maps, we can see that we have different land use, we have different soil types. This here is to show precipitation changes across the area. This here is elevation, change in height of things. Slope, where we have steep slope and shallow slope. And so we use several of these maps to show that it really does change as we move around. And so if we think about all the differences that we see in a field, that should help us understand that the water requirements, the fertilizer requirements, and the yield and all those things are going to vary within the field, and we can maybe match those needs with the correct input. Okay, and so one of the things we like to talk about is oftentimes when we manage a field, we manage it as a whole area, but because of the variability, some areas in that field will get the right amount of inputs. Some areas, most of them, will get too much, and other areas won't get enough inputs, enough fertilizer, or enough lime. And so the idea here is if we can look at things as they vary or change in places, then we can then match our inputs with the correct with the right area. And the benefit of that is that we really reduce soil degradation and improve crop productivity. For example, in an area that was maybe not getting enough fertilizer, if we apply additional fertilizer, that'll result in additional crop growth, additional residue, biomass, which will help reduce soil erosion. Also, by not applying too much fertilizer, maybe we have an area of the field that needs less fertilizer, we reduce the amount of pollution or nutrient leaching. When we think about liming, if we apply too much lime, then we have alkalinization. If we don't apply enough lime, we have we don't correct the acidification problem. And so, if I have a field that one area doesn't need lime, another area needs lime, and I apply the same amount of lime throughout the entire field, across the entire field, then I've over-applied lime and caused alkalinization. Okay. So when we think about spatial variability in agriculture, there are many factors that are going to influence that spatial variability. Plant available water, soil fertility, weather, our cultural practices and how we till or how we apply compost, manure, or how we allow the animals maybe to graze in the field, plants, the genetics that we're using. Okay, and so we want to think about all these different factors and how they influence both crop productivity, soil conservation, and management. Right? If we're not managing these correctly, they do affect crop productivity. In other words, we'll have less crop productivity. Also, we could have some serious soil degradation as part of what's going on. Okay, this wraps up our introduction to applications of GIS and GNSS in agriculture. This is our first video lecture and the first video lecture of 5.